It was a hot night in Mexico, the kind of night where the air carried the scent of dust and the stars shone brightly in the dark sky. In a small village known as San Hierro, four friends had gone out for a walk. They were bored and looking for something exciting. Between laughter and jokes, the conversation naturally turned to the scary stories of the region. San Hierro was an ancient town, full of traditions and legends passed down through generations. Among them all, there was one that stood out for its ability to send chills down the spines of even the most skeptical. It was the story of the Road of the Lost Voices. According to the older residents, those who dared to walk it after midnight were lured by whispers from the surrounding forest, voices calling travelers to never return. Miguel, the boldest of the group, looked at his friends with a mischievous smile. He was always the one who loved provoking the others. "Can you imagine if we went there to debunk that silly story? I bet nothing will happen." Beside him, Rebecca rolled her eyes, visibly impatient. "You always want to act like the brave one. These stories exist for a reason, Miguel. But if you want to prove you're fearless, go alone." "Come on, Rebecca," Emily said, almost laughing, as she adjusted her backpack on her shoulders. "This is just folklore. Every village has these legends, and if they're not real, at least we'll have a good story to tell." Francisco, the quietest and most sensible of the group, looked uncomfortable. "Listen, I don't think we should mess with this stuff. My abuela always said that those voices, they're not just imaginary. They're souls that suffered, souls that seek company." Miguel laughed it off, trying to sound casual. "Your abuela also said that if we whistled at night, La Lechuza would come for us." "That's just superstition, Francisco. Come on, let's prove we're smarter than these ghost stories." Although hesitant, the group eventually gave in to Miguel's suggestion. The idea of exploring the Road of the Lost Voices seemed irresistible. After all, they were young. The fear mixed with adrenaline made their hearts race, and they wanted something to break the monotony of the night. The road was a few kilometers away from the village, surrounded by dense forests and mountains that loomed in the distance like silent watchers. As they got closer, the atmosphere began to change. The air felt heavier, the trees taller and more twisted. Miguel, always leading the way, held a flashlight that cast flickering beams of light on the uneven dirt path. Rebecca felt a pang of regret when they finally saw the start of the road. It was just a dirt path, but there was something sinister about it. The tree branches formed a kind of tunnel, blocking out the moonlight. The place seemed swallowed by a darkness that made no sense. "This is it," Miguel said, with a tone of challenge in his voice. But even then, he hesitated for a moment. An inexplicable chill ran down everyone's spine, even though the night was warm. The group began walking slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Rebecca hoped Miguel would give up soon, but he stubbornly pressed on, laughing nervously. Emily stayed close to Francisco, who seemed to sense something strange in the air. As the son of generations of farmers, he felt that there was something wrong with this place. The silence around them was unsettling. There were no sounds of crickets, birds, or any signs of life, just the sound of their own footsteps and breaths. Then, for the first time, they heard it. It was a low sound, almost indistinguishable, like wind passing through tiny cracks. But soon it became clearer, a murmur, voices, words that couldn't be understood, but they were there. They stopped simultaneously, looking at each other with wide eyes. No one said anything, but they all knew they had heard it. Miguel broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "It's just the wind, it's nothing." But his voice trembled. He knew it wasn't just the wind. As they walked deeper in, the murmurs grew louder. Rebecca started feeling a pressure in her head, as if something was trying to enter her mind. Emily clung to Francisco's arm, unable to hide her fear. "It's closer now," she whispered, almost inaudibly. At some point along the road, the voices began calling them by name. First it was Miguel's name, whispered sweetly but with a strange melody, as if it was something ancient, unlike any modern language. Miguel stopped abruptly, swinging the flashlight toward the forest. Nothing, but he could feel something watching him. Francisco, who had heard countless stories from his grandmother about lost souls and deceitful spirits, was the first to suggest they turn back. But the voices wouldn't let them leave. They began to scream desperate. They sounded like they were in pain. But at the same time, there was something cruel in them. Something that said, "You belong to us." Rebecca was the first to give in to panic. She ran without thinking, plunging into the forest's darkness. The others shouted after her, but their calls were quickly swallowed by the murmurs that now filled the air. The sense of despair was suffocating. The whispers were now like muffled screams coming from all directions. Emily and Francisco also became separated in the confusion. They tried to follow the beam of Miguel's flashlight, but something seemed to distort the road. It was as if the ground was shifting, twisting beneath their feet. Emily fell, and when she looked up, there were faces, hundreds of pale faces among the trees, staring, unblinking. They didn't move, but she knew they were alive. "Francisco!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the murmurs. She tried to stand, but something cold and invisible held her down. Miguel was the last to remain on the road. He moved forward hesitantly, holding the flashlight as if it could protect him. But then he stopped. In the middle of the path stood a figure, tall, hunched, completely shrouded in shadows. The figure had no face, but Miguel felt it was watching him. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, he fell to his knees as the flashlight rolled away, leaving everything in complete darkness. The next morning, the road was empty. The villagers of San Hierro found backpacks and belongings scattered along the path, but there was no sign of the young people. They say that even now, anyone who passes the road of the lost voices can hear the murmurs. They start low, almost imperceptible, but if you listen long enough, you'll realize something terrible. The voices know your name.